13 after 9 o'clock news and views on Salam Media, and a very big warm welcome to our Polokwane listeners on One Nation FM. Next, we're going to be talking to education specialist Professor Mary Metcalfe, and we're looking at the issue around the United Kingdom offering South African teachers about R250,000 South African rands to relocate. So let's understand what this means for South African teachers and for the South African education system as a whole. Professor Metcalfe, a very good morning to you. Thank you for being with us this morning. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Julie. It's good to be with you.
Okay, now recently we've heard very worrying stories about a certain group of our learners not being able, I think it was grade 4 learners, unable to read with comprehension. There was a huge outcry around that. And I know that's tied in with English not possibly being their first language. We had an in-depth interview on that matter. We're also hearing stories about under-resourced schools. For example, up to 45 children per classroom. Now, this, and you kind of wonder why teachers or why the UK is targeting South Africa, knowing the type of problems we're sitting with in our education system or in our schools regarding what we have always perceived as being a shortage of teachers. What's your take on this, Professor?
So, Julie, you've asked quite a few important questions. I'm not sure how much time we've got, but I want to take each of them in turn. I want to first of all start with the question of children cannot read, and then I want to talk about class size. So South Africa participates in an international study called PEARLS, which is benchmarking across countries. Of the countries that participated, we came last.
Ooh.
Now, that is of concern, but I want to get that into context. We were the only country in sub-Saharan Africa. There was only one country in South America. So this measurement of our reading is not that we came last in the world. We came last in a set of 43 countries, which included the countries that dominated in the ranking, which were from Asia, which were from Europe, and from the ex-USSR. So it's not last in the world. And I think we should stop feeling that this says we're the last in the world. Does it mean that we shouldn't measure ourselves against these highly resourced countries? No, because it's good to know where we stand relative to them. The second thing is that you mentioned the importance of being able to read in English. Well, the test was conducted in the children's home language, which would be any one of our home languages. But here's the thing, is that the test was set in English and then translated into our African languages. So an item in the test, which I've looked at quite carefully, was about 800 words. It included it was about octopuses. And I don't know how many children living around Polokwane would have ever seen an octopus. But can you imagine? And I'd love you to talk to people. I have fun doing this all the time. I ask people whose first language isn't English or Afrikaans, please translate this sentence for me. An octopus's arms has suction caps. Now, to translate that into an African language, all of my informal, and I know it's informal research, suggests that it's not just going to be 6 words, it's going to be 20 words or more. The concept of suction, the concept of a suction cap, the concept of a creature which has arms, which has suction caps, means that our children were reading very long passages in their home language. I haven't been able to establish if there was a time limit, but I'm sure there was. So the question is, they could read, but they couldn't really read at that level, that length of time, in the time allowed. So we've got to be very careful about saying our children can't read. And I'm glad that I've begun to really look at the test in detail, because I agree we've got a reading crisis. I agree we've got to do much more. But the negative narrative reflects badly on our teachers, and I don't think it's fair. I could say more, but I won't. In terms of class size, this is a challenge. It's a challenge not related to shortage of teachers, but it's related to our shrinking national budget
Oh,
and the fact that teachers are that most important item in the education budget, which consumes most of the resources. Between 80 and 85% of our education budget goes correctly to teachers, but there are real pressures on the budget. And that's one of the anxieties going forward. So, those were the two main questions I think that you asked there. Is that okay?
yeah, that's fine. I just have so much more to put to you this morning. Two further questions, and the one would be uh, let's go to these questions that were asked of these children in the exams.
Mm.
Surely the people that set the exam papers should be working very closely with our teachers, or is it in fact the teachers that set the exam papers? Because lots of the times, even with matriculants, we hear that they were totally unprepared for those questions, they didn't cover it in their syllabus, etc., etc., etc. I'm sure you've heard this all along. That's question number one. Question number two uh, is our education system in a crisis?
Okay, so firstly, I'm glad you asked the first question, because this does need to be explained. And of course, not everybody's aware of how benchmarking studies work. So the tests are actually set in the US,
Ooh.
because that's where Pearls is located. Children across all of these countries do the same test. In the majority of the countries, they did it online. So it would have perhaps been translated into Japanese or Chinese or whichever language was being spoken in those countries. So the point of making it an unseen test for a standardized process benchmarking like this is that we're saying all of the children across the world in the 43 countries who did the test hadn't seen the test before. And there was an assumption that children would have been more familiar with the concept of an octopus, etc. For me, what's important is, and I would love to, I've spoken to some academics and who say maybe they'll pick this up as a research project, is our level of reading adequate in English for grade 4? So our children transition from their home language into English at grade 4, and well, many of them do. Many children start off with 3 years in the foundation phase in their first language, and then many schools transition to English from grade 4. Now, that's important because grade 4 start using English as the medium of instruction. Maybe it's not a language that they're familiar with, that they're exposed to every day. And also, we now have subjects. So, when I say benchmarking, what should we benchmark ourselves against? I think we should be benchmarking ourselves against the reading demands in English in grade 4. So, I looked at some grade 4 textbooks, and the average length of a passage that a child has to read and answer questions is about 130 words. It's much shorter. Now, whether or not, and the questions, by the way, are simple and simpler, and the concepts are more familiar and they've been taught. Now, whether or not our children are reading at the same level as the other children in the 43 countries is not in debate. What matters to me is that children have enough reading confidence in their first language, which is the starting point for reading, and growing confidence in English to cope in English in grade 4. So sorry, it's another long answer, and I have to also answer what does that mean for like the NSC? Well, the NSC isn't an unseen test. It's based on a set curriculum which teachers have and which they do their best to make sure that all learners have mastered. If ever, in the National Senior Certificate, the matric, there are learners who say they weren't taught something, that would reflect badly, I think, on the school and on the teachers, that maybe they took a gamble that it wouldn't be covered, but the teachers and the schools know what needs to be covered, and the examination is set on what was stipulated in the curriculum.
Okay, Mary, I did ask the question about if our education system is in a crisis, but let's leave that question and a whole host more for the ad break. So let's go and pay the rent first, and we will be back with you in a minute or two.
Thank you.
Sends 2 children to school, and buys medication for his elderly mother. All of this is made possible through Africa Muslims Agency's Qurbani program. AMA trains small-scale farmers to raise quality livestock that provides an income for their family, as well as food for their communities. Sponsor your Qurbani today in Africa for 1,750 Rand or 2,750 Rand in South Africa or various countries around the world. Donate online at africamuslimsagency.co.za.
Kids these days are smart, and when you're competing for their attention against their smartphones, you need to make smart choices, like using Sunfoil triple refined pure sunflower oil in every meal you make. It's naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether you're cooking, frying, or baking, you get the great tasting results that'll get their attention faster than the latest app. And if that doesn't work, change the Wi-Fi password. Sunfoil. Now we're cooking.
Tens of thousands of lives have been shattered with the recent earthquake in Turkey and Syria. This is the most devastating earthquake to hit the region in nearly a century. Ashraful Aid teams are providing much-needed assistance. Donate today at www.ashrafulaid.org.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a masterpiece. Droplets of gold inspires precious design. Platinum bursts with intricate freshness, and every pure diamond becomes more than just a girl's best friend. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, where timeless dreams become a reality. Come to us. We tailor-make designer gold, platinum, and diamond jewelry. Trade in or remodel your old gold. Clad yourself with classy name-branded watches. We offer insurance valuation and freezer card calculation. Visit us at 534 Ridge Road, Overport, or call 031 208 9142. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, manufacturers of fine gold and diamond jewelry.
There are no days on which good deeds are more beloved to Allah than the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, which means they are more beloved to Allah than the days of Ramadan. Subhanallah. For many people around the world, your Qurbani meat will be the only meat they eat all year. So give Qurbani now with Islamic relief and gain the immense rewards of the 10 best days.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Welcome back. It's exactly 9:27 a.m. We're talking with education specialist Professor Mary Metcalfe. We're looking at the issue around the United Kingdom offering South African teachers almost R250,000 to relocate to the UK, because I presume they probably have a teacher shortage there. But we're also honing in on our education system here in South Africa. What are the problems? How can we circumvent them? And very importantly, the one question I did put to the professor is, are we in a crisis here in South Africa as far as our education system is concerned? Welcome back, Professor. Would you like to respond to that question?
Thank you so much, Julie. I don't think that we're in a crisis. I do think we need to do better. And I think the areas where we definitely need to do better is in early literacy and numeracy. If we can invest more resources into improving and better planning, into improving reading across the country and early numeracy in the country, I think it would go a long way towards ameliorating some of the other challenges. And what are some of these other challenges? Is that if our learners are more confident in literacy and numeracy by the time they enter grade 4 and then continue, we would probably experience less failure of young children repeatedly through their school career, which means that they often repeat. We have high levels of repetition, which in itself contributes to the large class sizes. Where you have large areas of large inefficiencies, such as dropout and failure, what you also get is repetition, and you then get dropout. And there's so many young people who, in the years of high school after grade 9 and about 10, start disengaging from school. They're older than their colleagues because they're fellow learners, because they've been repeating. They are socially embarrassed by that. They find the work difficult because they never mastered reading, and they disengage and leave school. So by addressing literacy and numeracy, I think we would reduce failure and repetition and reduce dropout. So those are the areas that for me are some of the priorities. But we must also remember that schools are in society, that the pressures on families, the huge social inequalities we have, the stress on families, and the problems in society such as drug abuse, etc., all influence, particularly children in the secondary level. So we have lots of work to do, but I'm not persuaded that we can say we have a crisis.
Okay, so that being said, then you spoke about dropouts, and we do know we've been hearing in the media regarding the very poor pass rates as far as our matriculants are concerned, and then it's been pegged at what, 40%, which shocked me, really shocked me. So if we are, pushing, I've lost you. I can't hear you.
Yeah, now you can hear
Okay,
me.
there you go.
Really, the pass rate for matric is not 40%. It's above 80%. The issue is how many of our learners who start in grade 1 actually reach all the way to matric. But the matric pass rate is actually, I think, fairly high. The problem is we have too many dropouts before they have an opportunity to write matric. Does that make sense?
It does, yes, it does. The other issue then, Professor, is obviously all these young people aspire, those that do believe that they've got what it takes, aspire to go into tertiary education. Uh, and there again, we're finding a high dropout rate. What's going on there? And I know we started out by talking about the UK offer to South African teachers, and we'll get back there. But all of this is so intertwined with what we're talking about this morning. So your thoughts on the dropout rate at tertiary level?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is to debate with you a little bit, but then we must get onto the UK thing because I've got another meeting just now.
Sure.
But firstly, in terms of tertiary, I always find it fascinating that we in the public mind, it's schooling and tertiary, whereas in fact there's a wider range of studying opportunities that need to be valued and need to be strengthened that should be possible other than universities. No country builds a university system on the assumption that everyone's going to be going to university. Well-functioning economies build their education and training systems on the notion that there's a variety of pathways to learning, including vocational education, technical education, and forms of education that aren't offered at universities at all. So I think one of the challenges that we face, in addition to the few that I've listed, is shifting the public imagination to the notion that it's not university do or die. Our universities do have high levels of repetition. There's data that shows that instead of doing a degree in 3 or 4 years, many learners are doing it in 6 and 7 years.
Ooh.
And I would argue it's the same poor foundations, intelligent young people without necessarily the language confidence and the meaning of instruction, which should be being built right from primary schooling.
Okay, so Prof, my final two questions, as you are you're having time constraints, and that is, let's look at what the Department of Basic Education has to say about this offer by the UK. In their, they believe that it is most welcome. They went on to say that there is currently an oversupply of teachers in the country. That's what they have to say. But NAPTOSA are saying something different. And they are saying that there's an artificial surplus of teachers in the country. And I know that you're not involved directly with any of these institutions, but from where you sit, how do you see this? Basil Manuel is saying that in fact there are shortages of junior primary teachers and teachers of the vernacular, which I think you alluded to as well. So let's look at those two issues and then the offer from the UK. Is it a good thing for our teachers? Do we have an oversupply? Should they grab those opportunities and go for it and perhaps come back and, just get to see a bit of the world and broaden their horizons?
Yeah, let me take the supply demand thing. Definitely, I would agree with Basil Manuel that supply and demand is definitely related to subjects, and it's also related to location in the country. My experience is that many teachers, for understandable reasons to do with the fact that there's advantages for their families, prefer to teach in metropolitan or large urban areas. There's parts of the country, and I can think of, for example, the Northern Cape, where I've sometimes worked, where it's very difficult to find teachers who are willing to move there with their families. And many of the teachers, because they need a job, will go there without their families and go home, sometimes on the weekends if it's close enough, sometimes in the holidays. So it depends on the location, it depends on the subject. Now, to come to the question of the UK offer, this is not unusual. There's often a situation where a country, for various reasons, doesn't have enough teachers that they need, and then they look for the supply internationally. It's not just the UK that's looking for teachers at the moment, it's also North America. Let's look at the particular features of the UK education system right now that are contributing to their teacher shortage. Firstly, they've got fewer entrants coming into training and they're not meeting their own targets. Secondly, there is a net migration into the country of families with children, so there's increasing demand. And thirdly, they're experiencing teacher strikes. Um,
Yes.
so all of those are factors that our teachers would need to consider when they look for this new learning experience. And I definitely see it, as you do, as a valuable experience to work in a different country, to understand different systems, to grow in expertise. But one should not be seduced, if I can use that word, by the £250,000 rand, because in pounds it's £10,000. And
Absolutely.
what you can buy with £10,000 is very different to what you would be able to buy for with £250,000 in South Africa. So a family that says, okay, let's do something interesting, let's do something different, or an individual would need to factor into their reasoning that this amount is there simply to cover visa and the costs of moving. Then they would need to survive with their salary on the British pound in a new environment. It may very well be a good idea to do that because it would be a learning experience. They would return to the country, I think, hugely fortified with new experiences, teaching in a different social context and the challenges of urban education in big cities like London, if that's where they're placed. So I don't think it's the end of the world if our teachers some teachers decide to take up the offer, but they need to personally consider the advantages and disadvantages. And the South African education system, I'm not seeing this as any major threat.
And we are well placed with teachers and our institutions to get our teachers ready to go into the education system. Our universities and colleges are up to par. Obviously, world class standard. That is why the UK can make this very supposedly lucrative offer to teachers in South Africa.
Yes, they're making it not only to teachers in South Africa. Well, first of all, let me say, absolutely, I've got confidence in the quality of our teacher education provision. We always can do better. There's no doubt about that. But there's not a problem with the quality of our teachers and their determination and dedication. And I wish more often that as a country we would applaud them for that. But this is not focused only on South Africa. It's focused on previous colonies where English is the dominant language. So they're looking at China, they're looking at Ghana, they're looking at India, Singapore, Jamaica, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. So if there's push and pull factors, at things that attract a person and pull them, and push factors, problems in a country that may make it more attractive to move away, all families or individuals that choose to take up this offer are going to have to look at all of the pros and cons.
Absolutely. Professor Mary Metcalfe, what a pleasure having you on the show this morning.
Thank you.
Professor, of course, is an education specialist talking to us about the offer by the UK to South African teachers, obviously to relocate. But I do hope to talk with you again sometime in the future. It's been absolutely delightful.
Thank you, Julie. That was nice to talk to you. Okay.
It is exactly 9:40 news and views on Salam Media. Next, we will be talking with family physician Dr. Rapiti regarding the high influenza cases in South Africa.